My name's Daniel. This is a story my late Uncle Carter told me years ago, something that happened to him back in the summer of 1996. I never thought much of it at the time, but after he passed, I found an old stack of his journals in my dad's attic. Reading through those pages, I realized what he experienced was a hell of a lot darker than he ever let on. Carter was a Coast Guard veteran, built like a dock piling, weathered, tough, and not the kind of man to get spooked easily. He spent most of his adult life on or near the water, handling storms and situations that would have sent lesser men packing. That summer, Carter agreed to take a short assignment at a decommissioned lighthouse off the coast of Maine. The station had been automated for years, but they were having trouble with the beacon and backup systems. Until a full crew could get out there, someone needed to babysit the place and monitor the equipment. It wasn't an easy place to get to. A narrow strip of rock, barely visible at high tide, with one stone lighthouse rising about 60 feet into the air. No dock. Supply drops by boat when the weather was decent, or by chopper if it wasn't. He brought enough canned food, coffee, a cot, and a few paperbacks to last him 6 days, 2 radio check-ins a day. Otherwise, he'd be alone. The first couple of days were uneventful. Cold mist hanging over the water, waves slapping against the rocks. The kind of isolation Carter actually liked. But on the third night, something woke him. A sound he couldn't immediately place. It wasn't the wind rattling the shutters, or the steady pulse of the foghorn. It was a soft, deliberate knocking. 3 sharp taps, and not at the door, not at the windows. Carter said it came from inside the wall itself, like someone was standing inside the stone. He grabbed his flashlight, did a full sweep of the tower. Nothing. Dense fog outside so thick he could barely see the base of the lighthouse from the top of the stairs. He chalked it up to the structure settling, or some trick of the acoustics, and went back to bed. The next morning, while making coffee, he noticed something strange near the base of the spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. A single, wet footprint. Barefoot. Not his. Too small. Slender. With long toes. Pressed into the dusty floorboards. And no others. Just the one. Leading toward the stairs and vanishing. Carter wrote in his journal that he tore the place apart looking for any sign of an intruder. Checked every room, the supply shed, even an old rusted storage hatch behind the kitchen. Nothing. No person, no animal, no open doors or broken windows. He radioed in his morning report like nothing happened, but he admitted in his notes that it unsettled him. That night, the knocking returned, but this time it came from the top of the lighthouse. From the lantern room itself. 3 clear knocks against the glass. Carter grabbed his flashlight and climbed the stairs. The heavy mist outside made it impossible to see more than a foot or 2 beyond the glass. He expected to find a gull or some debris caught by the wind. But when he got up there, the room was empty. No birds, no branches, nothing out of place. Then, as he turned to leave, he saw it. A handprint. Pressed against the inside of the glass. 5 long, slender fingers spread wide, palm flattened against the condensation. The problem was where it was. Higher than a person standing inside could have reached. Carter said his stomach dropped. He didn't sleep much that night. By the next morning, the fog still hadn't lifted. The air inside the lighthouse felt thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. That night, he started hearing footsteps. Soft, bare feet, slapping against the metal spiral staircase. Always going up, never down. He said the sound would start near the base and slowly ascend toward the lantern room, stopping just before reaching the top. When he'd gather his nerve to check, there was never anyone there. The pattern repeated itself through the night. On the 5th day, Carter decided to search the one place he hadn't yet. The old cellar beneath the lighthouse. It was a cramped, damp space, barely more than a crawl space where maintenance equipment had once been stored. In the far corner, buried beneath a pile of rotted cloth and twine, he found a small, weathered lockbox. The wood was warped with age and salt, the hinges rusted. Inside was something he never described in detail. His exact words in the journal were, "I saw it, and I wish to God I hadn't. Some things aren't meant to surface." He closed the box, reburied it where he found it, and immediately called for an emergency evac. The fog was too thick for a boat to reach him until morning. Carter spent one final night in that place, holed up in the kitchen with a flare gun in his lap. At 2:11 a.m., the knocking returned. Not from the walls, not from the glass above, but from the cast iron stove, barely 3 feet from where he sat. 3 soft taps from inside the room. He wrote that he didn't turn around, didn't check. He just sat there in silence, gripping the flare gun, counting down the minutes until sunrise. When the boat finally arrived, the fog lifted like it had never been there. The captain said Carter looked like he'd aged 10 years in 6 days. He turned in his equipment, filed a brief, incomplete report, and never set foot in a lighthouse again. I asked him once, years later, what he thought was out there. If it was a person, an animal, or something else entirely. He just shook his head and muttered, "The sea keeps its own. Some places are meant to be left alone." After reading those journals, I decided to check the coordinates he mentioned. There's no lighthouse listed there now. No records. Nothing. Just empty water. And that's the part I can't shake. Not what my uncle wrote, but what nobody else ever did. This happened about 2 years ago, right in the middle of fall. You know that stretch of time when the beaches are empty, the tourists are gone, but it's not fully winter yet? Everything feels quiet and kinda eerie. I live in a small coastal town in Maine, one of those places people visit in the summer and then forget exists the rest of the year. That night, I was hanging out with my buddy Eric. Neither of us had plans, so we were just drinking beers in his backyard, watching the fog roll in over the trees. Then Eric, like always, gets one of his bright ideas. "Dude, let's drive out to Marshall Point Lighthouse." Now, Marshall Point is a spot locals know not to mess around at after dark. The place gets locked up, and no one's supposed to be out there once the sun goes down. But Eric had a bolt cutter in his truck from work, don't ask, and after a couple beers, it didn't sound like the worst idea in the world. We grabbed a couple more for the road and took off. It's about a 30-minute drive, winding through pitch-black woods and empty back roads. The fog kept getting thicker, the kind where your headlights feel useless. When we pulled into the empty parking lot, it felt wrong. Not a single car, no lights, no signs of life. The lighthouse sits out on this long, narrow wooden walkway over the rocks, with the ocean crashing all around it. The only sound was the waves, loud and constant, and the occasional creak of the walkway boards under our boots. We hopped the gate. Well, Eric cut the chain because of course he did, and made our way out to the lighthouse. Up close, at night, the thing was unsettling. The beacon light would rotate, cutting through the fog every few seconds. And in those flashes, it felt like the shadows around us shifted. We sat on the rocks for a while, drinking and daring each other to get closer to the edge. But the whole time, I had this gnawing feeling, like we weren't alone. At one point, Eric goes, "You hear that?" And sure enough, slow, steady footsteps on the wooden walkway behind us. Creak, creak, creak. We both spun around, shining our phone flashlights down the path. Nothing, but the sound didn't stop. Closer and closer. Finally, out of the fog, we saw a figure. A man in a long raincoat, hood up, walking slowly toward us. I called out, "Hey man, you work here?" No answer, just steady, silent steps. Eric, who never spooks, leans over and mutters, "Let's go, dude." Now, we started backing away, keeping our lights on him. And that's when a second figure appeared. Another man, same raincoat, same hood, blocking the other end of the rocks. Suddenly, we were boxed in. The ocean behind us, 2 strangers ahead. Eric, thinking quick, grabbed a big rock and shouted, "Back off!" That made them pause for a second, just long enough for us to bolt. We scrambled along the jagged rocks, slipping and cutting our hands, making our way around the side of the lighthouse toward the parking lot. But they followed. Not running, not calling out, just walking. Those slow, steady footsteps over the wood and rock. We finally reached the car. I fumbled my keys like a complete idiot while Eric was screaming at me to unlock the door. I finally got it open, and we both dove inside, locking the doors as one of them reached the driver's side window. I turned and got a good look at him. His face was pale and wet, like he'd just crawled out of the ocean, and he was smiling. A wide, crooked, impossible grin. I jammed the key into the ignition, started the car, and we tore out of that parking lot so fast we nearly hit a ditch. Neither of us spoke a single word on the drive back. The adrenaline eventually wore off, and the silence in that truck was deafening. To this day, neither of us has gone anywhere near that lighthouse after dark. I don't know what those guys wanted. If they were squatters, some deranged drifters, or something else. But whatever it was, we got out by the skin of our teeth. And you won't catch me near any foggy lighthouse at night, ever again. My Uncle Kevin worked maritime maintenance for a private shipping company for almost 15 years. He's one of those no-nonsense, old-school types. Doesn't care for ghost stories. Never believed in any of that strictly a tools and oil kind of guy. But a few summers back, at a family barbecue, he told me about one job that still makes his skin crawl. I made him repeat it twice, because the details were so specific, and every time, it was the same. This happened in 2015, off the coast of Washington State. There's a lighthouse out there called Crow's Head Point. It's not the kind you see on postcards. It's a squat, ugly thing, perched on this jagged slab of rock that juts out of the ocean like a broken tooth. The place had been automated for years, but the equipment still needed manual maintenance every so often. Kevin's job was to boat out, stay overnight, and check the electrical systems, clean the lenses, and refill the backup generator. Normally a solo job, but because of some weird equipment malfunctions earlier that year, the company sent a younger guy named Eli along with him. At first, it was routine. The place was isolated, battered by constant wind and salt spray, but nothing unusual. During the day, they scraped rust-off railings, patched old wiring, and checked the foghorn compressor. At night, they'd cook canned food over a little propane burner and play cards by lantern light. Just two guys stuck on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Nothing to be scared of. Until the third night, Kevin woke up. He said the air felt wrong. Not cold, heavy, like being underwater. He sat up in his cot and noticed immediately no beam. The lighthouse beacon wasn't turning. It was supposed to rotate automatically. And even if it failed, a backup should have kicked in. But the room was pitch black. Kevin shook Eli awake, and the two of them went up the narrow metal staircase to the beacon room. When they got there, the motor was still humming. The gears were turning, but the light was jammed in place, pointing out to sea, and something was hanging from the fixture. It was a length of drift, netting thick, slimy, half-rotted, and stinking of salt water. But the weird thing was, there was no broken window, no open hatch. The place was sealed tight. They cut it down, tossed it out into the sea spray, checked the seals, and figured it was a freak accident. Maybe a storm forced it in somehow, but neither of them could explain how it made it inside. The next night, same time. Kevin woke up and it was dead silent. No wind, no waves, just this thick, suffocating silence. He looked over and Eli was already sitting up, staring at the ceiling like he was listening for something. Then it started. A faint scraping sound. Not outside, inside. Something dragging across the concrete somewhere below them. They grabbed the knives they kept by the cots and crept down to the supply room at the base. But there was nothing. The door was still bolted from the inside. On the third night, Kevin woke to find Eli standing by the window, staring out at the dark water. When he asked what he was doing, Eli mumbled, "He's out there." Kevin asked who. and Eli pointed out toward the jagged rocks at the water's edge. He swore he'd seen a man standing there earlier, tall, still, arms at his sides, just watching the tower from the far edge of the rocks. But when the beacon's light passed back over the spot, no one was there. On the fifth night, the beacon failed again. When they reached the top of the tower, this time it wasn't jammed. The light housing was open. The massive lens, one that took both of them to lift, had been removed from its bracket. It was lying carefully in the center of the floor, and in its place was a pile of smooth black stones, stacked in a crude little tower. Kevin swears there was no way that could have happened without them hearing it, and no one should have been there, but it had. That night, they resealed everything, called for an emergency pickup at first light, and barricaded themselves in the sleeping quarters. But somewhere around 2:30 a.m., Kevin woke up to Eli whispering in his sleep. Not normal words, some kind of low, rhythmic chant, words Kevin didn't recognize. Over and over. Then it stopped. Kevin sat up and saw Eli standing at the window again, hand pressed against the glass. When he asked what he was doing, Eli whispered, "He's waiting." Kevin pulled him away from the window. They sat with their backs to the door until daylight. The company boat arrived late the next morning. Kevin never took another lighthouse job after that. Eli quit the company 3 weeks later, moved out of state, and no one's heard from him since. Kevin told me he still doesn't believe in ghosts. Never has. But he also says some places aren't meant to be visited, and Crow's Head Point is one of them.
A few years ago, when I was in culinary school, our class was invited to attend a prestigious food expo in a bustling city about 3 hours away. The expo featured renowned chefs, live cooking demonstrations, and industry experts sharing their culinary secrets. We were all buzzing with excitement. To cut costs, our group decided to share hotel rooms, so I ended up staying with 2 other girls from my class, Leah and Sam, in a cozy suite. After checking in, we were eager to explore the city a bit before the event, so we dropped off our luggage, freshened up, and headed out. The streets were lively, full of people out enjoying the night, and we found a charming little cafe to grab a light dinner. Afterward, we picked up some snacks and headed back to the hotel around 10:30 p.m., chatting about our plans for the expo. Leah had a couple of glasses of wine at the cafe and was in a giggly mood, while Sam and I were just tired and ready to unwind. Back at the hotel, we changed into our pajamas and started organizing everything for the next day. At around 11:30 p.m., just as we were about to settle in, the phone in our hotel room rang. It jolted all of us. Who would be calling this late? Leah, who was closest to the phone, answered with a light-hearted, "Hello." Her expression changed almost instantly. She mouthed to us, "It's the front desk." She listened intently, her face growing more serious by the second. After a moment, she put the phone on speaker. A man's voice, calm but firm, echoed through the room. "Good evening. This is the front desk. We've noticed there's been an issue with your reservation. It seems the payment for your room has been declined, and we need one of you to come down immediately to settle the bill." We all looked at each other in confusion. That didn't make any sense. We had all pitched in and paid when we checked in earlier in the day, and we'd been given our room keys without any issues. Leah, who was still on the phone, told the man that we had already paid. He insisted there was a mistake and that the issue needed to be resolved that night. "Why can't we handle this in the morning?" Sam asked, stepping closer to the phone. The man's tone shifted slightly, becoming more insistent. "If you don't come down now, your stay will be terminated, and you'll have to vacate the room." That's when the red flags went up. Sam, always the cautious one, asked the man to send someone up to the room if there was a real problem. Silence. Then, the man's voice grew colder. "This can't wait. If no one comes down within the next 10 minutes, we'll be forced to take further action." We all felt a creeping sense of dread. Something about the way he spoke felt wrong, too forceful, too off. I whispered to the others, "This doesn't feel right." If this was legit, they'd send someone up or we'd handle it tomorrow. "Let's stay put." Leah agreed and hung up the phone without another word. We sat there in uneasy silence for a few minutes, expecting someone to knock on our door or for something to happen. But nothing did. The hotel was eerily quiet. None of us slept well that night, but no one came to kick us out. The next morning, as we checked out, Sam brought up the strange phone call to the front desk. The receptionist looked at us, puzzled. "We didn't make any calls to your room last night, and your reservation is fully paid for." My stomach dropped. Leah, Sam, and I exchanged uneasy glances before quickly leaving the hotel. Even now, I wonder who made that call. Why did they want one of us to come down to the lobby alone in the middle of the night? The whole experience still gives me chills. What could have happened if one of us had gone down?